So I'm finding the cover of that book. Messengers of Deception, UFO Contacts and Cults, Jacques Vallée. Forward to the 2008 edition. Nearly 30 years have elapsed since Messengers of Deception first appeared in the U.S. Since then, the controversial views it expressed have been vindicated and thrown into sharp focus by shocking events that were reported worldwide. In particular, the stark warning I issued in connection with the hymn cult, "It Only Cost Your Life," appears as unfortunately prophetic in light of the March 1997 collective suicide of Heaven Gates as a group of became known. The mass killings of the adepts of the Order of the Solar Temple in Canada, France, and Switzerland in 1994 illustrated the dangerous form of mind control and the simulation of extraterrestrial contact I first described here in connection with the adventures of the Grand Master. The cattle mutilation phenomena remains unsolved. As for the Raelians, the cult started by Vollerhelm, whose early lectures in San Francisco are recalled in this book. It has flourished internationally and burst into prominence in recent years with the claims of human cloning. Not only have these issues continued to simmer under the surface while UFO believers bask in their benign expectation of aliens from the stars, but a venerable mass conversion has taken place among the public and the media elite. The belief in extraterrestrial visitation is practically taken for granted among wide sections of the population, especially among the young, while the hypothesis of alien contact is an exciting one, justified on basis of continuing observations of unidentified flying objects. It carries the potential for exploitation and manipulation by deceptive groups with their own hidden agenda. I believe that UFOs are physically real. They represent a fantastic technology controlled by an unknown form of conscience. But I also believe that it would be dangerous to jump to premature conclusions about their origin and nature, because the phenomena serves as a vehicle for images that can be manipulated to promote belief systems tending to the long-term transformation of human society. I have tried to identify some of the manipulators and to highlight their activities, which range from apparently harmless hoaxes such as the false Professor George Adamski's meeting with Venetian spacemen to bloody expeditions that have littered the American landscape with the carcasses of mutilated animals. I have found disturbing evidence of dangerous sectarian activities linked to totalitarian philosophies. The ease with which journalists and even scientists can be seduced into indiscriminate promotion of such deception is staggering. In the context of an academic attitude that rejects any open investigation of paranormal phenomena. Such a fanatical conversions must be expected. For me, that is only one more reason for an independent thinker to remain vigilantly against false ideas and simplistic political notions planted by those I have called the messengers of deception. And then we got the prologue, a dream world far off. Give me the superstition of a nation, and I care not who makes their laws or who writes their songs. Mark Twain. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? So, except nobody ever jumps into the Pontomac. 83. The atmosphere is already warm and humid over Washington. We didn't feel it in the aircraft, but the morning haze over the Pontomac tells the whole story of what was waiting us. The huge gray shape of the Pentagon is rising towards us as we turn to land at National Airport. At 9 o'clock, the taxi drives by the monuments whose names are those of the country's past leaders, Jefferson, Lincoln, Washington. The feeling of approaching the world's power center increases. So does the humidity and the heat. Man, Washington, D.C. does suck. What is humid? Oh, that's a nightmare. 9:30. Within a block of the White House, I enter the new executive office building, the modern brick structure where senior officials work is protected from the heat by thick glass doors. The architect had a good idea of putting a fountain in the patio. That helps a little. The office of the president's science advisor is on an upper floor. 10 o'clock. I step out of the elevator and a secretary takes my name, checks with the appointment book, the subject of the discussion, unidentified flying objects, UFOs, a volatile topic that can be ignited tomorrow by a New York Times story on a frustrating case by military planes in Iran, or by a network documentary on the abduction of some fishermen in the South. A topic nobody in this city wants to touch with a 10-foot pole, a topic that I am beginning to suspect is as much a puzzle to the military, the intelligence community, and the science advisor as it is to the public and to the news media. It is amusing to watch how each sector manages to hide its ignorance behind its own professional rhetoric. The military has a double standard. In public, it keeps a stiff upper lip. Whatever they are, says the generals, UFOs cannot possibly pose a threat to the security of the United States. Why is it then that amazed witnesses continue to report the mad scrambling of jet fighters every time a light wanders through the sky? None of the regulations that make it a duty for military personnel to report UFOs and a crime to talk about them has been withdrawn. Even after closing the Air Force's Project Blue Book 10 years ago. The intelligence community likes to give the impression that it knows all about UFOs, but, of course, cannot reveal what it knows. Its job is to pretend that it knows everything. Yet I am beginning to suspect that the real secret in Washington, the secret that must be kept at all costs, is that the intelligence community knows nothing, although it certainly has files full of tantalizing details nobody has been able to put together yet. The scientific community is far behind in the times, fighting rearguard skirmishes in the name of rationalism. Academic scholars periodically rally behind some luminary who has just discovered the final rational explanation, and periodically the explanation has to be withdrawn under public ridicule. Flying saucers have been explained scientifically as plasma discharges, swamp gas, status, inconsistency, cognitive dissonance, refraction effects, and temporal lobe epilepsy, but they keep right on flying under the noses of the explainers. That's true. That's a damn good line right there. Don't you think? In fact, that's excellent. Excellent. That was excellent. I can see why everyone is so pro Jacques Vallée. Is he the dude writing this stuff, or somebody else? Does he have somebody else writing for him? The typical of the thousands of close encounters cases reported in the last 30 years is this sighting in Quarable, France. If I pronounce it right, which heralded a major wave of sightings in Europe in 1954. The witness, railroad employee Marius de Wilde, saw a craft that had landed and two occupants of it. French police and Air Force intelligence regarded the object as unidentified. Photo couriers of the U.S. Press International. That leaves the UFO buffs who have been collecting stories for 30 years, concentrating on the kinds of data that fit their theories. They have been fighting each other in an endless, pointless confrontation, and not of ideas and theories, but of personalities and egotistic conflict. Some encouraging words by President Carter electrified these groups when he asked Jody Powell and science advisor Frank Press to see what could be done. The new director of NASA was gingerly approached. Would the agency agree to act as a focal point for public inquiries? The director said he would. What about a project to investigate the current sightings? NASA was going to think about it. Seated across the desk from the science advisor's assistant, I began asking my own questions. Why NASA? I would like to know. NASA deals exclusively with space technology. Has the Science Advisor Office already established that the UFO phenomena is technical in nature and originates in space? Or is this choice merely a response to the perception of the public and the media. Several serious researchers in this field question that idea that UFOs are extraterrestrial visitors. So why pick NASA rather than the Department of Energy, which could deal better with the physical effects, or the National Institute of Health, which are capable of investigating physical responses to prevalent responses so prevalent among witnesses. Dr. Schneider is a longtime professional civil servant. He's urbane, soft-spoken, brushes the question aside. In a mind of the public, the UFO problem has to do with space, and therefore it is appropriate for NASA to deal with it. Are we talking primarily about public relations then rather than science? Before our circumspect invisible college, a network of scientists who are privately investigating the mystery invest time and effort on presenting our data, probably the most detailed investigated set of UFO cases ever selected. We have to know these answers. Is the government thinking of starting a new Project Blue Book? A new Condon report? If so, we would certainly not participate. That would not leave the science advisors without assistance, however. A file of papers on the desk contains letters from UFO groups offered from contactees who want to tell the president about their space brothers. Recommendations to set up saucer observatories equipped with radar and lasers. They have spent lonely nights on hilltops waiting for visitors from the sky. And some have returned claiming to have met them. Good luck, NASA. 11:30. I leave the new executive office building, calling to mind another conversation a few months earlier with a member of the French cabinet. The quiet apartment was the setting for a private discussion, which began with a review of French research on the subject and drifted toward the possible causes of the phenomenon. If the UFOs did not have extraterrestrial cause, if they were not space visitors, then what? I suggested that the phenomena, or at least its social effects, might be closely monitored by a human group, not necessarily a government. No analysis of the problem would be complete if it did not address the possibility that a group of unknown persons either influences the phenomenon itself or is using public reaction for its own purposes. Preposterous. Question mark. My host did not seem to think so. Standing by the window, my friend looked at the darkening street and then turned around and says, "That possibility doesn't exist, but we know that human beings would do what human beings would do with such power. I have seen the effects of power. Believe me, in my years in government, if your hypothesis turns out to be the answer, I will jump into the scene without waiting for developments." The Seine, I guess, is that a river? Seine? Seine. Noon. In the bright sun of Washington, the humid the humid, hazy air, I remember the chill of that conversation in Paris. Did I sense the same helplessness in the answers I just heard? No, the Carter administration is acting as if it is concerned only with responding to public interest in the subject. NASA will rapidly sense this attitude and will turn down the assignment. The mood in Washington is far removed from the reality of a phenomenon which may be scaring farmers in Iowa right now, or playing with high-performance aircraft over Japan, Iran, or Spain. Washington is not partial to long-term analysis. Besides, the Potomac is not the, I guess it is, the scenes or signs. No one ever jumps from the Key Bridge. Three aspects of the UFO problem. The topic of unidentified flying objects has always posed a thorny problem of public policy, but it has always been approached as a short-term question of public relations. I have followed the application of the policy with interest, both in France and the United States, and when I first became interested in the sightings during the 1954 wave in Europe, the official position was simply to deny the observations. At the time, I was a student, had no access to good information, and could only wonder about government attitudes. I became seriously interested in 1961 when I saw French astronomers erase a magnetic tape on which our satellite tracking team had recorded 11 data points on an unknown flying object which was not an airplane, a balloon, or a known orbiting craft. Quote, people would laugh at us if we reported this, end quote, was the answer I was given at the time. Better forget the whole thing. Let's not bring ridicule to the observatory. Let's not confuse the public that there is something we don't know. The main argument against UFOs at the time was that, quote, astronomers don't see anything unexplained, end quote. Well, there we were, a team of professional astronomers seeing things we couldn't explain. Not only were we denying it, we had destroyed the data. I wanted to know how many of our colleagues were doing the same thing. How many sightings were swept aside? How many lay dormant in scientific or military files? I went through the French Air Force data. Later, Major Quintanilla authorized me to study the cases gathered by the U.S. Air Force. I wrote a couple of books on the subject to summarize what I found. There was a real phenomenon there, I concluded. It might very well originate from outer space. The Washington policy at the time was not to ridicule witnesses, but simply to claim that the 98% of all sightings had been explained by the Air Force. In 1967, as the University of Colorado began spending the $512,000 given to Professor Condon by the Pentagon to study UFOs, my interest had begun to shift. Why is it, I wondered, that the occupants of the UFOs behave so much like the denizens of fairy tales and elves of ancient folklore? Why is the picture we the picture we can form of their world so much closer to medieval concepts of Magonia, of the magical land above the clouds, than to a description of an extraterrestrial planetary environment? Why were UFOs becoming a new religious form? I spent years in I spent a year researching this angle and emerged with a great appreciation for psychic aspects of the phenomenon. I could no longer regard the flying saucers as simply some sort of spacecraft or machine, no matter how exotic its propulsions. Back on my computer by then, I had become a computer scientist and was leading a research group working under contract with the Advanced Research Project Agency, a project that brought me to Washington several times a year. In my spare time, I pursued my UFO studies, trying to find some pattern in the global distribution of sightings. The most clear result was that the phenomenon behaved like a conditioning process. The logic of conditioning uses absurdity and confusion to achieve its goal while hiding its mechanism. There is a similar structure in the UFO stories. I am beginning to perceive a coherent picture of the flying saucer phenomena for the first time. Now that I am pursuing the idea that UFOs may be a control system, and now that I am aware of their link to human consciousness, I still think there is a genuine technology at work here, causing the effects of witnesses are describing. But I am not ready to jump to conclusion that is that the technology is some kind of spaceman. There are three aspects to the UFO problem. First aspect is physical. The UFO behaved like a region of space of small dimensions, about 10 meters, within which a very large amount of energy is stored. This energy is manifest by pulsed light phenomena of intense colors, by other forms of electromagnetic radiation, and by microwaves that create distortions of the witness's sense of reality. The second aspect is psychological. It is debatable whether anybody has seen the actual technology that supports the phenomenon. What is seen, reported, is an image, that is, a perception of a UFO by a human witness. Reports of UFOs show all kinds of psychological effects on the witnesses: perception distortions, unconscious barriers, and mental blocks. Witnesses also show evidence of suggestion and post-hypnotic effects. Exposure to phenomena causes vision and hallucination and physical effects, long-term personality changes. The third aspect is social. Belief in the reality of UFOs is spreading rapidly at all levels of society throughout the world. Books and periodicals on the subject appear at an ever-increasing rate. Documentaries and major films are being made now by young people of the UFO generation, young men and women who were born just after World War II. who grew up with flying saucer stories, who have moved into influential positions in the media. Expectations about life in the universe have been revolutionized by such belief changes in the public. Political and economic attitudes are changing too. Many of the themes of yesterday's counterculture can be traced back to the messages from space, coming from UFO contactees of the 40s and 50s. The experience of a close encounter with a UFO is a shattering physical and mental ordeal. The trauma has effects that go far. And then it says here, the most obvious aspect of UFO phenomena is the physical. The cases of 10% material traces, burnt depressions, imprints, and the Canadian case near Chapu, Quebec, an area 27 feet in diameter was scorched in repeated incidences. Photo courtesy of the U.S. Press International, and apparently that's supposed to be burnt area. And but notice there's a tree, big old tree there. It always seems to be associated with stuff, and rocks. So we don't want to talk about that stuff, though. And by the way, a lot of these people end up seeing Bigfoot in similar situations, or in the same event, or close to the same time. So anyways, beyond what the witnesses recall consciously, new types of behavior are conditioned. A new type of beliefs are promoted. The social and political and religious consequences of the experience are enormous if they are considered. Not in the days or weeks following the sighting, but over this time span of a generation. Could it be that such effects are actually intended through some process of social conditioning? Could it be that both the believers and the skeptics are being manipulated? Is the public being deceived and led to false conclusions by someone who is using the UFO witnesses to propagate revolutionary new ideas? The purpose of this book is to explore these questions. In a Paris restaurant, this is much more easier read than Joshua's book. Oh my God. Flows a lot better. That'd be nice if he actually rewrote that book, but I perhaps he just want to go approach it again. He wants to hear about entity food. I mean, you hear it as an aspect of the research, but and it might be a really important one for that matter. And he might be onto something actually, but the way he wrote the thing is just very difficult to read. For a simple man like me, at least. One day in 1973, two friends met for lunch in a quiet Paris restaurant. One of them was a journalist with a long-standing interest in UFO problem. The other was an intelligence officer with the French Air Force, who had enthusiastically promised during a previous conversation to find out all he could about the true state of affairs on the military side. They sat down at a quiet table in a corner, far from curious ears. "Did you get any information?" asked the journalist, ready to pull his notepad from his briefcase. "Is the government going to do anything?" The officer looked a long time and replied, "You won't like what I've got to say." He spoke slowly and with a strange note of hesitancy. "What's the matter? Is our government hiding terrible secrets?" "I didn't go to our government. They don't know anything. I went to the American contacts. He paused. Human society is a peculiar thing. I know that. You don't need an American to. I mean, it's a balance, a sort of equilibrium that can be equally upset. You see, it rests on the combination of trust and fear. The military, the government, and that runs, all that runs because people know their place in the world isn't threatened by any drastic changes. What does this have to do with UFOs? Oh, but it does, don't you see? If we let people believe that those things are out there, we have no explanation for them, the whole structure is in trouble. People will transfer their fear and their trust to a different place, sort of like a run on the banks. The question went unanswered as the writer approached to take their order. As the waiter, did I say writer? As the waiter approached to take their order. When his friend had made his choice between Sol Marineri or Entrecôte, I don't know what that means. The journalist continued, so the military doesn't want to take any chances, huh? Not until they know what's going on. This thing is too big. Would you say they are covering up then? That's not the right way to put it, the officer said. When the waiter had left their table, there isn't a particular group deciding or enforcing the cover-up. Everybody simply avoids looking at the problem. Why upset the whole machine? The journalist settled back in his chair, lacking the satisfaction of a simple conspiracy that he had frankly expected. What he had received was a problem of much more vast and subtle proportions. And that is what we're dealing with. He's absolutely right. The world of contactees. What this French officer didn't realize was that the impact could not be avoided indefinitely. UFOs continue to be seen in such large numbers that the public is forcing scientists and the military to examine the issue. But other, more subtle things are happening too. They have to do with those who claim to have received direct knowledge from UFOs and contactees. Whenever a civilization approaches a dramatic turning point, some symbol or concept arises to crystallize that change. The shiny eagle of the Roman legions, the Templar's cross on the sails of the conquistadors have such symbols spelling the end of one world and the dawn of another. For the world of the coming decades, the key symbol may well be a shiny disk from heaven. Many people around us today are preparing to greet it with delight, even if that means falling under the control of forces they do not understand. These people are the UFO contactees and the believers in celestial visitation, the followers of the saucer prophets. They can pave the way for dramatic changes. And then they got this going on here. A photograph here, and it says the physical traces left by UFOs have been on frequent concern to the U.S. military. It's always some damn black and white old picture. Here, investigators from Kirkland Air Force Base, New Mexico, are measuring the radioactivity at the landing site where a bush had been burnt near Sauk Kuro in April 1964. The man standing at the left is the main witness, Patrolman Lonnie Zamora, photograph courtesy of United Press International. It's a common mistake to assume that contactees are always irresponsible crackpots or elderly mystics. A case in point is a young man named Gregory, whom I used to know as a systems programmer with one of our leading think tanks. He quit his job to form a psychic center. He is now publishing a newsletter devoted to his experience with higher entities. He believes that in so doing, he follows the telepathic instructions of a superior force. Some feel that he has found a new moral framework based on revelation. Others argue that he is a victim of a delusion that could spread like an epidemic. In either case, the implications are serious. It is not because of their numbers or because of their leaders' thirst for power that the followers of such sects will be especially influential. Our institutions are vulnerable to the spreading belief in the irrational. People like Gregory do offer us a new dream, but it is so far from reality that it could easily turn into a complete fantasy. Here is a sample of his writing, his pseudo-historical revelations received from wise beings who fly through outer space. On the eastern shore of the peaceful sea, God brought forth the American Republic for the purpose of assembling the high consciousness required to receive and establish this new union. God sent his son Melchizedek, one time Lord of Salem, unto Christopher Columbus. Other contactee groups have overt political purposes. The leader of one such group told me the earth is the property of one group of saucers that controls this end of the universe. They call themselves the Brothers, and they are the ones who brought the Christ on earth 2,000 years ago. If we get a little out of control, and maybe Russia would start to throw some missiles at us from Cuba, well, they might step in if it got too bad and help us out. And they told us that they would. They told us they would. This group of contactees is nationally organized as a political party. Before we reject these views as examples of harmless lunacy, we should observe that people once have the same view of the Church of Scientology. Indeed, the inventor of Dianetics is said to have practiced ritual magic with the rocket expert named Jack Parsons, who met in Mojave Desert in 1945, a spiritual being who he regarded as a Venetian. People also used to reject completely the beliefs of the Mormon Church, whose founder would today be regarded as a contactee. But how many religious movements started in the same way? For every individual who is openly identified as a contactee, how many more have received what they regard as secret illumination? It is apparent that the transformation they undergo can strike at any place at any age. It is purely random, then. Do the UFOs select their victims? Does it spread like an epidemic, or does it develop like a psychosis? Although one group of contactees was studied in detail by sociologist Leon Festinger, in his book When Prophecy Fails, we do not really know the answer to these questions because too few of the contactees have been carefully investigated. What we know is that their transformation releases ideas that challenge established structures. The followers of modern UFO cults are often 10 persons who, like Gregory, have become disenchanted with science and technology. Scientific reluctance to consider valid claims of paranormal phenomena is slowly driving many people to accept any claim of superior or mystical contact. The voice of science has lied to the 2 of 10. The voice of science has lied too often. That's what it's supposed to be. So the line, okay, too often. This is true. And it's like every institution. A large fraction of the public has turned it out completely. Science, social science has not yet. That's a very honest statement from a scientist. My God. That's one of the most honest statements I ever heard from a scientist. Social science has not yet achieved an understanding of the process by which new religious experiences arise and new sects become influential churches. Also, revolutionary cultural changes often appear at first, as the UFO sect does do today, to be irrational, absurd, and contemptible. There is an historical parallel for this enchantment with rationalism. To the educated disciples of Aristotle and Plato, many religious writings, such as the Apocrypha of St. John, must have looked like laughable tissues of delusions unworthy of scholarly examination. Amid Michel, a noted French author, has pointed out that none of these brilliant minds speculated for a second that such lunacy spreading among their ignorant slaves might eventually spell the end of the classical world. In the 19th century, the religious establishments laughed when a young man named Joseph Smith followed the orders given to him by an angel of light named Moroni and found the Mormon Church. Today we find it easy to laugh at UFO contactees like Gregory because they are still isolated. We dismiss the phenomena that fuels their beliefs as a mere aberration derived from a physical mirage. Scientists joke at the strange lights reported by housewives and refuse to study the genuinely unexplained phenomena that are contained, for example, in the files of U.S. Air Force. As for the claims of the contactees who believe they have been aboard vehicles, the scientists simply know this can't be true. But blatantly dismissing these claims, they are ignoring some of the hard lessons of man's spiritual history. For, in the words of sociologists Glock and Stark, all religious experiences, from the dimmest to the most frenzied, constitute occasions defined by those experiences and experience them as an encounter between themselves and some supernatural consciousness. Faced with a new wave of experiences of UFO contact, our religions do seem obsolete. Our idea of the church as a social entity working within rational structures is obviously challenged by the claim of a direct communication with visible beings who are endowed with supernatural powers. Some modern preachers have already recognized this challenge. Evangelist Billy Graham, for example, has suggested that UFOs may, in fact, be heavenly angels. Their occupants, he says, are astonishingly angel-like in some of their reported appearances. Fundamentalist Presbyterian radio preacher Dr. Carl McIntyre, is that what it is? Has even organized a UFO bureau in Collingswood, New Jersey, to investigate the connection between UFOs and angels. But why restrict their interest to the traditional view of angels? An equally impressive parallel could be made between UFO occupants and the popular concept of demons. Indeed, sociologists have pointed out that the same elements are involved in diabolical contacts as in divine encounters of increasing intimacy with what is defined as a supernatural consciousness. There are even some religious thinkers who see this sinister hand of Satan in the more bizarre UFO cases. That's probably a good place to take a break. Now, I enjoy this one. I can read this book, actually. And, man, I struggle with it. Hutchins' book, man, fuck. UFO counterculture. Who is likely to be the underdog in a conflict between the old myths of rationalism and the new myths of revelation from space? I'm afraid human reason has much to lose. The history of man is not one of smooth, continuous development. Rationalism, on which modern scientific thought is based, had to fight long and hard to establish itself. Once in power, however, it has fallen into complacency and has become unwilling to recognize the occurrence of the irrational. I am Michelle, Michelle is correct when he draws our attention to early confrontations of this kind. Western culture went through such a confrontation when the fanatics of the early church destroyed the Greek scientific establishment. The conversion which humanity underwent in antiquity was prepared by the collapse of the ancient religion and began in the middle of the Hellenistic period and went on with even greater strength under the empire until it was preferred in the victory of Christianity and the passing of the ancient culture into the Middle Ages. Writes M.P. Nielsen in his book Greek Piety, what he describes as a catastrophe that befell the ancient world with its advanced knowledge in astronomy and geometry, of mechanics and of philosophy. During this grave crisis, the Greek rationalists proved to be incapable of recognizing the cultural changes around them and fell into a 1,000-year darkness. What form did the conflict take? It was the conversion from rationalism to mysticism, from the clear and logical lines of Greek thought to faith in wonderful supernatural and supersensuous, from love of the beauty of the world to the body to flight from the world and condemnation of all that was corporal. The real counterculture of today is not one of new lifestyles and radical attitudes. The counterculture of UFO contact is more durable, more subtle, because it is not tied to a particular social group or age bracket. If the science advisor to the president ever decides to ponder seriously the policy questions posed by the UFO phenomenon, he might begin with the observation that the modern world faces spiritual bankruptcy because of its failure to deal with the rational. When the barbarians did what the barbarians did to the works of Plato and Aristotle, some new cults may very well do to modern science and philosophy. Michelle once wrote to me in a depressed mode, "All of this has happened before, complete with gradual replacement of experimental doubt by faith and superstition. What strikes me most in the contempt in which the intellectuals of the time held their enemies. They found themselves killed, or at least thrown out into the street before they could realize what was going on. The whole idea of blind faith has seemed so ridiculous to them that they had not even bothered to seek information about it. A young man who has spent months on the trail of contactee cult leaders, Bo and Peep, recently sent me a pathetic tape. His appeal was direct and profound. I am confused now. I go through periods of emotional agitation. I represent a person who is going through what normal people call a depression or a difficult period, but I have gone through these difficult periods enough times so that now it's quite creative. I know I am confused. I am really asking you for help after 2 weeks with these girls on this Bo and Peep thing. I got to a place where I know that my conscious mind couldn't figure it out. I got as subtle as I believe my mind is capable of getting. I had to let go, give up believing that I could know. So I was driven to other faculties. Faith is one of them. Do you have faith in the process, in the gods being more evolved than us, in flying saucers or not? We pray to them in our language. We pray for specific things. The cult this young man has joined will be described in more detail in Chapter 4. I hope that he will find in this book some answers to his tragic puzzlement. His adventure makes obvious the depth of the emotions that the UFO counterculture can generate and channel. This counterculture of moderate contactees comes at a time when science has already shut itself off from the common man. At the same time, science has the power to determine the future of humanity. It can destroy a planet. For all practical purposes, there is no longer any meaningful communication between the man in the street and the frontiers of research where such power is generated and controlled. Expert opinion, in quote, on any subject of policy, from energy supply to cloning, from the ban of the SST to the censorship of TV violence, has become a game in which the answers are constantly revised, not to reflect new knowledge, but to follow the trends of the academic fashion. Language of each discipline has been an esoteric jargon that cannot be penetrated even by someone with an advanced education in another field. Scientists are often socially and geographically isolated. This isolation of knowledge is matched by the failure of other social structures. Here too, the parallel with the ancient Greece is interesting. In 5 Stages of Greek Religion, Gilbert Murray mentions that in Greece there was gradual awareness of 2 failures. The failure of human government, even when backed by the power of Rome and the wealth of Egypt, to achieve a good life for man, and the failure of the great propaganda of Hellenism, in which the long-drawn effort of Greece to educate a corrupt and barbaric world seemed only to lead to the corruption and barbarization of the very ideals which it sought to spread. Under these conditions, so similar to those of the Western world today, in which human government is regarded with suspicion, and which education of the emerging nations by the affluent ones is non-existent, what did the Greeks do? In sense of failure, this progressive loss of hope in the world, in sober calculation, and the organized human effort through the Greek, backed upon his own soul, upon the pursuits of personal holiness, upon emotions, mysteries, and revelations, upon the comparative neglect of this transitory and imperfect world for the sake of some dream world far off. A dream world far off, that is exactly what the UFO contactees are offering us when they invite us to step into a pleasant mirage, reprogram our consciousness. In the 18th and 19th centuries, a group of leaders attempting to start a new cult based on revelation was likely to be opposed by the combined power of the church and state. Modern contact cults find fewer obstacles. The intolerance that destroyed early heresy has gone out of fashion in our society. A more humane attitude prevails towards groups with extreme beliefs. The media seeks colorful theories to feed the public's expectations of miraculous breakthroughs. While doing research into the theories of occult groups in California, some of which I joined as a participant observer to learn their views about UFOs, I did not find a single group that had a consistent belief system. But neither did I find one that did not claim to have had some form of contact with an alien form of intelligence. I am not at the moment a member of any such group or sect, but I understand one thing: the idea of contact with so-called higher forms of consciousness has social and political implications that go far beyond its appearance of being a simple scientific speculation. The public is already cynical about the roles and values of government, science, and the military establishment. The mere statement that unknown objects are penetrating our atmosphere and maneuvering at will would further erode the people's confidence in all political structures. It would generate fear in many sectors. Consequently, governments in every country are trying to avoid such potential effects. by censoring information about unexplained phenomena, as the discussion in Paris restaurant quoted earlier indicates. But I doubt that censorship can long be effective in the face of continuous sightings by the public. I think that the UFOs represent an objective, really, that we can study only by revolutionizing existing disciplines. Confronting the irrational means promoting pioneer research in physics and biology. We also need to begin a kind of research that will take UFO data as empirical observations and try to use them to initiate an interaction with the phenomenon itself. We should do this now before the new myth is created, before the myth of extraterrestrial revelation replaces belief in the rational acquisition of knowledge. Sooner or later, the emotions stored in the UFO phenomena will be released. What kind of social reaction will appear then? There may be new churches and new political movements. Each sector of society will react in its own way. The temptation will be great for our technocrats to respond by building giant facilities to eavesdrop on the universe, like the multi-billion-dollar projects already proposed by some radio astronomers. Although these projects would do nothing to explain the observations of unusual objects on Earth, they might deflect some of the public's pressure that observations are creating. Such projects might be an astute political move to prepare the public for other things to come. A wise form of life insurance for rationalists attempting to preserve their own power, but they could never solve the spiritual problem raised by the idea of contact. The real consequence will be much more complex and will go much deeper. I propose that the UFO we see is, among other things, a device which creates a distortion of the witness's reality, that it does so for the purpose which is the project image, is to project image and fabricate scenes designed to change our belief systems, that the technology we observe is only the incidental support for a worldwide enterprise of subliminal seduction. Have we allowed our need for rationalism to become so much like a dogma that it cannot afford to open discussion of such possibilities? Evidently, the idea of contact with alien intelligence has acquired an explosive quality that goes far beyond the ludicrous appearance of a few fanatical statements by isolated believers. But it must be faced precisely because it is so potentially dangerous. Why UFOs are important. UFOs are extremely important to contemporary civilization because irrational forces are an integral part of the nature of man. These forces can be recognized. Once they are recognized, they can be nurtured and used. The subtle power of groups like the contactees lie in the unwillingness of existing structures to recognize the reality of new phenomena and the need for change. This failure makes it necessary for each individual to deal with the challenge of his own spiritual level. I believe there is a machinery of mass manipulation behind the UFO phenomena. It aims at social and political goals by diverting attention from some human problems and by providing a potential release from tensions caused by others. The contactees are a part of the machinery. They are helping to create a new form of belief and expectation of actual contact among large parts of the public. In turn, this expectation makes millions of people hope for the imminent realization of an age-old dream, salvation from above, surrender to the greater power of some wise navigators of the cosmos. With the release of popular UFO movies, many people who previously were skeptical have begun to jump on this bandwagon from outer space. I wish them bon voyage. Bon voyage. However, if you take the trouble to join me in the analysis of modern UFO myth, you will see human beings are under the control of a strange force that is bending them in absurd ways, forcing them to play the role in a bizarre game of deception. This role may be very important if changing social conditions make it desirable to focus the attention of the public on the distant stars while obsolete human institutions are wiped out and rebuilt in new ways. Are the manipulators in the final analysis nothing more than a group of humans who have mastered a very advanced form of power? Let me summarize my conclusions thus far. UFOs are real. They are physical devices used to affect human consciousness. They may not be from outer space. Their purpose may be to achieve social changes on this planet through a belief system that uses systematic manipulation of witnesses and contactees, covert use of various sects and cults, control of the channels through which the alleged space messages can make an impact on the public. One part of the book will assemble the argument against the idea that UFOs come from outer space. It will describe what contactees are actually experiencing: confusion, helplessness, and often despair. Part 2 will expand on the discussion to a subject that is shunned by all UFO researchers: politics. For if UFOs make an impact on our social reality, they are bound to change our political reality as well. This discussion will lead to a new model of what is happening, a model in which UFOs appear against the background of a worldwide manipulation operation. Part 3 will show the brutal consequences of this model. It may add apprehension to disappointment as we suggest that the mutilations of animals that are taking place throughout the western states are part of the same manipulation. A friend who reads this book in manuscript advised me not to publish it. That's not what America wants to hear, he said. America wants a big UFO that flies down from heaven as a close encounter of a third kind filled with new hopes for mankind. America wants a shiny spacecraft to replace the deflated balloons of its religious values. If UFOs are connected with unexplained mutilation of cattle and with behavior modification on a grand scale, Americans don't want to know about it. Even the sensational National Enquirer is of the same opinion. The panel of investigators which the magazine maintains to review UFO cases, a committee on which leading civilian research groups are representative, has decided that the link between UFOs and what do I can't and the mulatars, manipulations of multilaters. I can't say the damn word. Motelaters. And the militariters. What the hell is that? That's a word that I guess I have to learn. I am who I am. A bit of an idiot, I say. Mulaters. I think what it's saying is okay. Unexplained mutilation, mulatars. Okay, that's what it is. Why can't I? It's just my brain is shut off. I'm sorry. It's my MS, I think. I think it is. It could be something else altogether. Anyways, let's try this again. Has decided that the link between UFOs and the mulatars was an idea whose time had not yet come. All the UFO groups have avoided the issue. I am of a different opinion. The public is equally impatient with the believers' rhetoric and with the official denials. It has now heard both sides, aspects that both sides are lying, suspects that both sides are lying. It is time perhaps to take a long look at the facts. Sorry about that. I truly am. Why? Not so much for you, but for me. I part one, the context. Who wants to live the life that I live, really? Can't even read a book out loud. Fuck. There is in many of us, obviously, a deep-seated desire to assent to extraterrestrial forces, to be embraced by them, overwhelmed by them, and if possible, deprived by them for our own weary responsibility of ourselves. Hippos of outer space. Russell Davis, reviewing Close Encounters of the Third Kind, in the Observer, March 19th, 1978. Fuck. One. Section 1 and Part 1. The case against spacecraft. People wonder if they looked like an outer space deal. I told them I didn't know what an outer space deal looked like, but I do know this was made in America. I am sure I had a plain old GI in it. It had a plain old GI in it. I know that much. I would know the man if I saw him in Chicago tomorrow. What gets me is that if they are supposed to be such secrets, why do they put themselves in a compromising situation? Being near a highway, he did not have to be there. There wasn't any point being there. An aircraft instructor, 1966, authors of follow-up to an Air Force investigation. A fisherman from Mississippi who has been subject to lie detector tests 6 times, faces the nation in primetime TV, seated between Dr. Carl Sagan and an astronomer, describes the 2 robots who came down to take him into a UFO. There was a big machine with an eye. It examined me. Ufological experts across America pull out their yellow pads and consult their databases. The fisherman has been hypnotized by an engineer who learned the technique in his spare time, who assures us that the experience was real. a UFO expert, in quotes, having interviewed the witness in a room full of screaming reporters, has seen the truthfulness of his reactions by the light of their flashbulbs. This is what America is being told, and it happens to be what America wants to hear. This man we are asked to believe is adding to the knowledge we have of other worlds. The ufologists are cross-indexing his every sentence, adding final touches to the consistent picture they are painting of extraterrestrial life. In their view, there is no room for doubt. The fisherman, seated beside Dr. Sagan, now is making small talk with the astronaut, who, by the way, may have seen a UFO in space, has obviously observed the landing of a spacecraft and has been abducted by its robot occupants. The time has come to challenge this statement. I do not need a lie detector test to know the witness is describing what he saw, but I don't buy the story that he saw a spacecraft from another planet. Nor do I. I don't believe in any of that stuff. Spacecraft theory. The study of UFOs is very much like American politics in one respect. There are only two parties you can join. In politics, you can be a Democrat or a Republican. In ufology, either you don't believe in UFOs at all, or you believe that they are spacecraft from another planet. But are these necessarily the only two possibilities? If UFOs are real, it is obvious they are spacecraft. For many years, the best cases of unexplained sightings were of discs that appeared to be metallic, of large size, and capable of fantastic acceleration. They frequently disappeared by going straight up out of the witness's view, suggesting that they were going home to another planet. Their occupants were wearing diving suits and walking awkwardly. The French press of the 1950s, for instance, was full of reports about the robots and the Martians. The consensus among UFO researchers in the 1960s was that we were probably dealing with space invaders, space visitors. The idea at the time was revolutionary. Scientists like Carl Sagan pointed out that space visitations, if they occur at all, would be very rare. Other scientists like Donald Menzel rejected the whole idea because even the nearest star are too far away for interstellar travel to be feasible, even at high speeds. All such arguments are valid only if one assumes that their science has not superseded in any fundamental way the limitations of our science, that they have found no means of propagating information faster than the speed of light. Using of same concept of space-time as we are, in fact, we can make no such assumption about the space civilization. It could have had many centuries to develop beyond our own science. And it's got a picture of this is Pascagoula, Mississippi. Shipyard worker Charlie Hickson describes the October 9th in 1973 when he says an unidentified flying object landed in the old shipyard, or Scoopiter, something like that. Hickson claims three things: picked him and young Calvin Parker up and carried them aboard a craft where they were closely examined. Once again, photo courtesy of United Press International. The real question is, does the spacecraft hypothesis explain to our satisfaction the facts of the UFO phenomena as we know them today? The answer is a definite and resounding no. The contactees and their friends will challenge this answer in many ways. What about the messages we are receiving through channels, through automatic writing, assuring us that the vehicles come from other worlds? What about our own observations in deserts and remote areas? And what about the evidence of the star map seen by contactee Betty Hill aboard the UFO which abducted her? And finally, what about the hundreds of reports of landings that have been made around the world? We need to examine closely the so-called evidence to decide whether or not it contributes anything to spacecraft theory. There are too many landings. The first argument against the idea of flying saucers as spacecraft lies, oddly enough, in the large number of verified unexplained sightings. In my own files, I currently have approximately 2,000 cases of close encounters from every country on Earth, many of them involving occupants of various sizes and shapes. It may seem that 2,000 cases in some 20 years is not a very large number, but we are talking only about the cases that were actually reported. It is possible to calculate how many landings this represents if, as contactees claim, UFOs are spaceships whose occupants happen to be surprised by witnesses who wander onto the scene of the craft was being repaired, or our crew was conducting some exploration of our planet. To make this estimation, we must take into account three factors: the time of the sighting, the probability that it will be reported, and the place of the event. Most landings are reported to take place after 6 p.m. The frequency distribution that my computer studies have disclosed for every continent shows this activity peaking at about 10:30 p.m., decreasing sharply after that time, increasing again just before dawn. There are few reports of after 6 a.m. What could this mean? That the activity of the objects is nocturnal by nature and by choice. Then why do the reports decrease in frequency around midnight? Simply because people go to bed? After 10:30 p.m., the number of potential witnesses is severely reduced. Then let us ask the question, how many reports would we have if people did not go to bed but stayed outside to watch these so-called spacecraft? The answer is about 30,000. We should have to multiply the answer of cases after the factor of 15. Now, this last figure does not begin to approximate the actual number of events, because we know from many independent studies that only one case in 10 ever gets reported. Then we should have about 30,000, but then not 30,000, but 300,000 cases in our files. But this still isn't the whole story. Most landings occur in unpopulated areas, away from dwellings. If the Earth's population were distributed evenly instead of being concentrated in city areas, how many reports would we have? Again, taking a conservative multiplying factor of 10 leads us to the staggering conclusion that the UFOs, if they are spacecraft engaged in general survey of our planet, must have landed here no fewer than 3 million times in 2 decades. This is one of the little recognized facts of the UFO problem that any theory has yet to explain. The theory of random visitation does not explain it. Either UFOs select their witnesses or they are something entirely different from space vehicles. Either case, their appearance are staged. The strange physics of UFOs. The following unexplained sightings have been extracted from dozens of similar cases in my files. In March 1954, Santa Maria, Brazil, a man observed 2 occupants of a football-shaped craft who spoke in a strange language. The craft vanished silently and instantly. In June 1962, Verona, Italy, following a UFO observation, a woman was awakened by a feeling of intense cold and saw a being with a bald head near the house. She called other witnesses, and all saw the apparition shriek and vanish on the spot like a TV image when the set is turned off. October 1963, Whidbey Island, Washington State. A middle-aged woman saw a strange craft with 3 figures inside. It tilted, partially sank into the ground, grew in size, and departed with a flash. Yeah, we're doing something that's light, but something that's poltergeist-like, spirit-like, that somehow is able to use electromagnetic energy or something. I'm just making up shit, right? I don't know what the fuck we're dealing with or what we're seeing any more than anybody else does, but we're seeing it. November 1968, France. A prominent doctor saw 2 large disc-shaped objects merge into one. The single object sent a beam of light in his direction. It vanished with a sort of explosion, leaving a cloud that dissipated slowly. Consider what these sightings have in common. Each case, the so-called spacecraft did not disappear by moving away, even at high speed. It simply vanished on the spot, or it slowly faded away like a Cheshire cat, sometimes leaving behind a whitish cloud, sometimes also producing a sound of an explosion. In other cases, UFOs have been reported to enter the ground. I hardly need to point out that this behavior is contrary to what physical objects do, and quite impossible to duplicate with our own current spacecraft technology. It is the behavior of an image or holographic projection, yet at other times the objects have left material traces. There may be a machine invented, but a machine that remains out of view of witnesses, who sees only what it is projecting. When we go to the movies, we look at the objects and the people on the screen. We do not stare at the projector. Sounds and voices, too, come to us from the screen, not from the direction of the tape machine. Besides a single physical machine, a camera can trigger millions of similar experiences in a people who watch the resulting film projection. UFO events could be staged the same way to suggest to us an impending intervention from outer space. Most witnesses are not primarily reporting an object or a craft. They are reporting a light, a massive, multicolored, intense, pulsating light, a playful, fascinating, impressive, hypnotic light, which is accompanied by strange sounds. How much do we know from the available scientific literature about the effects of strong pulsating colored lights and other electromagnetic radiation? Pitiful little. Until this area is fully explored, we will have to think about the physics of UFOs, mainly in terms of the witness's perception, not in terms of spacecraft propulsion. The UFO creation. I guess I should get ready, clean up a little bit, do some running around, and get back to writing before I... hopefully today I'm going to be interviewing Brown Dwarf about his UFOs that he's filming in California, and he's filming on a consistent basis. UAPs. Unidentified aerial phenomenon called ghosts. The UFO creatures. Contactees tell us they have met the denizens of other planets. In some cases, the beings turn out to be robots or dwarfs in diving suits. But in most instances, they are humanoid, and they could breathe our air. They walk normally on our planet. In a variety of sightings, they were occupied by human beings. Occasionally, occupants were completely human or spoke human language. However, visitors from outer space would not necessarily be human in shape. They would certainly not breathe our air for fear of viruses. They might have serious problems with Earth's gravity. You can push the suggestions aside and assume that the visitors are advanced enough in genetic manipulation to have grown humanoid pilots for their spacecraft. Perhaps they have even kidnapped humans to breed space children destined to become saucer crew members. But even these outlandish assumptions fail to explain the facts. Temple, Oklahoma, March 23, 1966. An instructor in aircraft electronics at Stafford Air Force Base is driving to work at 5 a.m. on Route 65 and approaches the intersection at Highway 70. 1 mile before the intersection, I saw a very bright light. A mile or so to my right, I suppose it was a truck having trouble on the highway. I went on to turn west on Highway 70. I went a quarter mile or so, changed my mind, and thought that it was a house that was being moved down the highway in the early morning hours. Did I seem to be getting closer to it all the time? Yes, sir. I was parked on the highway and I got within 100 yards of it and stopped, got out of my car, started throttling towards the object, leaving my car lights on, my engine running. I got about 15 steps or so, and I happened to think I had a Kodak in my front seat. And I would like to get a picture. I hesitated just a second. And while I did, why this man that was dressed in military fatigue, which I thought was a master sergeant, his insignia was on the arm. He had a kind of cap which the bill turned up, weighed approximately 180 pounds, 9'9". He looked perfectly normal. Oh yes, he was just a plain old GI mechanic, or a crew chief, or whatever he might have been, happened to be on the crew. He had a flashlight in his hand, and he was almost kneeling on his knee, with his left hand touching the bottom of the fuselage. The object looked like an aluminum airline with no wings or tail, and with no seams along the fuselage. It lifted up vertically for about 50 feet, headed southwest, almost straight backwards, off by 10 degrees, at a speed estimated to be about 720 miles. Judging by the barns that illuminated along its path across the valley, it was the size of a cargo plane, but had no visible means of propulsion. The witness was grilled by a room full of officers at the Air Force Base. The truck driver down the road had observed the same object. Whoever he was, the man in the baseball cap was not no interplanetary explorer. Whatever they are, the occupants are not genuine extraterrestrials. This leaves us with the few alternatives. Either there are images created within the brains of the witnesses, possibly by remote stimulation of the visual cortex. This would explain why contactees Betty and Barney Hill disagreed on several details of the occupants' appearance, or they are characters in a stage occurrence, actors in a depth operation, carefully borrowing its concept from basic human archetypes in order to force a global behavioral change. Contactee experiences can be induced. One day in 1976, I went on a desert expedition in an attempt to verify statements received by automatic writing, a form of trance in which the subject is not aware of what his hand is writing and is apparently under the control of an outside entity. Although our search that day was negative, it is worth telling because it shows an element of the manipulation that is rarely discussed by the participants. It shows how easy it is to induce contactee experiences. Deserts have always exerted a particular fascination on the human mind. As we were driving along the Garlock Fault in a four-wheel drive Toyota, we passed Small Branch, ruins and forgotten mines, twisting tracks that indicated the power of this dream. Hundreds, thousands of men and women had brought to this desert the strength of their despair. And in the terrible heat, they had built, dug, planted, and carved an environment for other human beings. Miraculously, some of these endeavors had even survived. down in the valley, we saw vast fields of alfalfa being irrigated by strong water sprayers. Go and find crystal, but no machines, just pure crystal. Take crystal to the valley, point towards the sun, hold your mind still and wait. No matter how many of you, the force is strong. Don't lose control. Only with thought can you return. You will see the old way. We had decided to follow these instructions to the letter and see what would happen. The man who had channeled them was with us. He had already made several trips into the desert without finding anything. He sent me a copy of the message transcript. And I brought 4 good samples, of course, to our meeting place at Burbank. Retrieve pure crystal and use this as instructed. Not a game, but serious method of moving time back, a time block aside. This is absolutely necessary if we are to communicate. The messages were supposed to come from conscious beings who travel through the time. There were certain places on Earth, they claimed, which could serve as doors to other physical planes. They used these places in their own travels. The purpose of the crystal was to see through the time block. We can maneuver through the block to various nodes. As the children left the paved road and headed out the canyon past the old mines, I was reading the transcript again. You must strive to prepare a small group of people who can work in the realm of the incomprehensible. Said the instructions, our guide had done just that. At the turn in the road, we stopped, raising a cloud of dust from the scorched ground. As it settled, we met 6 men who had arrived earlier from Los Angeles with sound equipment and cameras. The day of UFO investigation on a bicycle were all gone, I noticed. The team assembled here had 3 powerful trucks equipped with 4-wheel drive, with our electronic equipment and communication gear. We looked more like an army strike team than like a group of researchers trying to verify some elusive psychic data. At last we neared the place indicated by the transcript. We were within 2 miles of the point it called the node. We found nothing that day, although we climbed over hills and rocks and peered into old mine shafts and observed many tracks in the desert. Everything was alive here. There was no peace. Some of the mines we came upon were obviously still in use. Boundaries were marked with white paint. Twice we saw a car driving in the distance. We took pictures with or without the crystal at several places there that resembled the description of the node. Given in the transcript, I got only pictures of the blurred landscape with its twisted bushes and rock piles. But I came close to experiencing the feeling of anticipation, excitement that gets hundreds of people to drive out into the hills and the deserts in search of alien truths. Our expedition was not without its minor mystery. Driving higher into the hills overlooking Garlic, we found a mine entrance sheltered from the great desert wind. There we discussed the possible meaning of all this and the remote chance that the message might come from some real alien source. The most likely explanation, of course, was that it simply came from our guide's unconscious. Most automatic writing can be shown to have a purely psychological explanation. At that moment, there was the sharp sound of a mine explosion behind me, like a popping of a flash bulb being crushed. There were only two of us in the entrance of the mine at the moment, and nothing was found that could explain the noise. There were only two of us in the entrance of the mine at the moment, and nothing we found could explain the noise. As a mystery, it did represent quite an anticlimax. After hours of climbing and driving and picking up rocks and scrutinizing the sky and the barren hillside. But I could understand how the will to believe could turn the smallest incident into the sign as leading to other signs and feeding the imagination until it constructed vast space operas. I had a more mundane reason for going into the desert beyond Mojave with my camera. Someone had sent me a manuscript claiming that he often caught UFOs in infrared film in the desert skies. The photos I took to try to duplicate this effect did show some dark spots, but they were quickly explained as being the result of developmental process. Perhaps there are flying saucers that hover beyond the hills where old mines are. Perhaps they are only visible in infrared range. Perhaps there are time folds and secret doors on the earth that allow strange beings to cross over the dimensions, but I did not find any. What I did find was the power of human imagination. In such isolated, unfamiliar places, it doesn't take much to create mystery, and the slightest influence will amplify it. Bringing scientific equipment, such as cameras, tape recorders, binoculars, and radios, will only create the opportunity for peculiar effects. And the more people in the group, the easier it will be to give the strength of reality to a faint impression of mystery and danger. We drove back to Los Angeles in a sober frame of mind. If UFO phenomena continued to be observed in the area, there will be no lack of believers. Here again, there is an opportunity for a new mythology to arise. I find another example of it in the remarkable story of Betty Hill, who thinks she had located the origin of flying saucers and has convinced several scientists that they came from outer space. A star map to nowhere. Many UFO investigators have become very excited in recent years because of witnesses of obvious sincerity. Mrs. Betty Hill had described what was believed to be a star map used by our mysterious visitors. These investigators are convinced that the maps she saw inside the flying saucer had guided the pilots to our solar system. This proves, they argue, that we are in fact being visited by a race of space explorers. I claim that it proves nothing of the kind. Betty's drawing is a map to nowhere. If there is some intelligence involved, Betty's map is another deliberate attempt to leading us astray. It is September 19th, 1961, in the White Mountains area of New Hampshire, and Betty and Barney Hill meet their flying saucer. At first it looks like a star. They keep driving on the lonely road, observing the object. It comes closer and looks like a disc. And then we got these 4 dots right here. I don't know what that is. During the field trip to Mojave Desert, authors photoed this apparent UFO formation using infrared film. The UFOs are simply artifacts of the film development process. Maybe. We also filmed stuff that looks just like that today with our digital cameras, and it definitely ain't that, what he just said. That doesn't mean that he's wrong. Barney stopped the car, gets his binoculars. The object has a large curved window, and behind the window, humanoids are looking at him. Barney rushes back to the car, frightened, drives away. A few miles down the road, the middle-aged couple loses all awareness of their actions. They next remember driving past Ashland, 60 miles to the south. The story of their nightmares and the hypnosis they underwent has been told many times. A psychiatrist took Betty and Barney back to the instant of the incident by using regressive hypnosis, and they both described a scene they could not remember consciously. The car was stopped. Eerie dwarf-like men in black uniforms took control of them. They were taken inside a flying saucer for medical examination. Barney Hill is now dead. He suffered a cerebral hemorrhage at 46. Betty has become a UFO celebrity and a rallying point for believers in extraterrestrial visitation. She is of 10 heard on talk shows and seen on television. She has done more than any other UFO witness in the last 10 years to spread among the American public a belief in space visitors. Several ufologists have now claimed that the home base of these visitors has been identified. They come from a planet circling a star in the southern constellation of Reticulus. This is by no means the first time that the supposed origin of flying saucers has been revealed, either by the UFOnauts themselves or by a deduction from words of the witnesses. In each case, the witness seems genuinely sincere and believes in the revelations, but in each case, the revelations contradict what all the other contactees are saying. The history of such identification goes back to the days of 1897 airship. Those occupants invited witnesses to come with them to a place where it doesn't rain. On one occasion, asked where they were from, the strange pilots replied, "We are from anywhere, but we shall be in Cuba tomorrow." On July 23rd, 1947, near Pitanga, Brazil, is that pronounced Pitanga? Pitanga. There you go. I guess that's how it is. A group of survivors saw a group of surveyors saw a disc-shaped craft land near them. One of them, Jose G. Higgins, saw three beings in shiny clothes. Translucent suits emerged from the saucer. They were 2 meters tall, had oversized bald heads, had huge round eyes, no eyelashes or eyebrows. The metal box of their something. I guess a metal box on their back. They drew the solar system for the benefit of the witness and pointed to Uranus as if to indicate they came from there. In other words, it came from his butt. In 1952, a man named Truman Bethurum met space beings who claimed they originated from Clarion, a planet hidden from us by the sun. And a radio interview and a conversation with me, a contactee named Jim has identified the home base of the saucers as Orion. The entities of light that appear in energy form said they were from the constellation we call Orion. They were here to prepare us to interconnect with the next level of universal intelligence. On November 2nd, 1966, a salesman named Darren Berger saw a dark object ahead of him on the road as he was driving home to Packersburg. I guess there it is. It is all blurry there. I'm assuming it's the C in there, but I can't tell. Or maybe it's Parkersburg, West Virginia, one of the two. A man on a dark complexion came out of a strange flying machine and approached him. A man of approached him. The man was dressed in a blue shirt, blue trousers, and gave the witness a message saying he came from another world called La Nunlos. On September 4th, 1967, in Latin America, a police officer named how do I pronounce it? Adrade, something like that. Andrade saw a dwarf wearing silver coveralls near a hovering disc. He pointed his machine gun at the creature, but a voice came from the object and ordered him not to use the weapon. The dwarf then attempted to convince Andrade to come to his world, which was very distant and much larger than the Earth, with many advantages for Earthlings. Let us not forget the UMMO off-air, which I described in the earlier book, The Invisible College, a complex series of messages allegedly coming from the Cosmic Federation of Planets has been received by people in Spain and France. These messages of the UMMO, capital letters, came to give full details on the origin and civilization of our visitors. We wish to inform planet Earth of our origin and of our purpose of our visit to you. We come from Umo, I imagine I could pronounce it, a planet It rotates around the star Iuma, recorded on the Earth under the destination Wolf 424. The mysterious beings even provided a map of Umo and details of its atmospheric composition. Finally, Uri Geller has stated that his power comes from a form of consciousness emitting from Huva, and Spanish contactee Jacques Bordes believes that the strangest being he saw was from Titan. Thus, we have at least 9 different revelations of the saucer's port of origin. An Ohio schoolteacher named Marjorie Fish has now added another chapter to this great quest by constructing a model of known sun-like stars and matching it to a map that Betty Hill saw inside the flying saucer. It is a model that indicates to many authorities among the UFO believers, men like Stanton Friedman and David Saunders, that the saucer which inducted the Hills hailed from Zeta Reticuli. Major Marjorie Fish visited Betty in 1969 to get more information about the map. Betty told her that she drew the map under post-hypnotic suggestion in 1964. She remembered it as a flat, thin display giving an impression of depth. Since she didn't move while viewing it, she couldn't tell whether or not it was truly three-dimensional or just flat like the television screen. It was about 3 feet by 2 feet and showed many stars, of which she remembered only the permanent ones, connected by lines. She also recalled a small triangle to the left. See Figure 1.3a. Miss Fish investigated this pattern by compiling a list of all the known stars within 55 light years of the sun that are good candidates for supporting life, and according to currently accepted cosmological theory, these are stars that are not too hot or too cold, that do not vary in brightness, that rotate slowly. The slow rotation being necessary if the stars are to have planets around them. There are 48 such stars. Marjorie Fish went on to build models of the positions of these stars by using beads dangling on threads and looking for suspicious alignments. Finally, she exhibited a configuration of 16 stars that was very similar to the Hill map when seen from a particular viewing angle. The astronomy professor of Ohio State, Walter Mitchell, has recreated the model by using a computer and has stated that he was impressed. David Saunders, a psychiatrist formerly on the staff of Condon Committee, now working for I think it's Mathematica, but I can't tell you because it's all messed up. It's blurry, that, but I don't know where it is. In New Jersey, added, I can find no major point of quibble with Marjorie Fish's interpretation of Betty Hill's map. In many lectures around the country, Stanton Friedman and others have shown slides of the model and the original map and have impressed audience with a resemblance, implying that UFOs are real spacecraft originating from Zeta Reticuli. People I have spoken to after such lectures came away with a feeling that the whole UFO mystery had at least been solved. I believe they are completely mistaken. Before I present my side of the story, I want to state that I think Betty and Barney Hill really saw a UFO and that something unknown stopped their car, took control of their minds. They were not lying. They were not nuts. I also think that Betty's recollection of the star map is a fact and not simply something she invented. I base this opinion on similar sightings in which objects have been described, often of very high symbolic value. These objects generally refer to time like a clock or to space like a map or a compass. We are not dealing here with an isolated incident, but with a rather typical event. The second point I want to stress is the great value of Marjorie Fish's work. The similarity between her model and the computer map is a tribute to her ingenuity and to the accuracy of her work, recognizing that the witness is sincere and that the analysis is accurate. We still have two very important problems before us. It is appalling to find that no one has raised them, and that UFO investigators have been so eager to jump to a sensational conclusion on the basis of the simple evidence presented. The two questions we must ask are these. One, from how many positions in space can we look at the 46 star model and find as good a match with the original map? And two, once we find a good match or even a best match, does that necessarily tell us anything about the origin of the UFOs? Let us examine the answers. I feel like crap. Zeta Reticulus and the computer freaks. How good are you at the game of 7 errors? Compare figure 1.3a and 1.3b and look for distances. You can see at once that the sizes of the dots vary and that many angles are not the same. The pattern does look similar, but lines have been drawn on it to reinforce the impression, so that one really doesn't get a sense of how exact or inexact the true resemblance is. Superficially, there is agreement between two patterns, but the detailed examination tells a different story. What about the duplication of this pattern by a computer? Doesn't this indicate that it is genuine? No, it definitely does not. It only means that Mrs. Fish's model was accurate, a fact I have already emphasized. The question posed to the computer was the wrong one. Given the stars in the model and the viewpoints chosen by Marjorie Fish, the computer was bound to display the same pattern that she had already found with her little beads and threads. It would be a lot more interesting to ask the computer to place itself in succession at each of the millions of possible space point views and to calculate how many would give a good fit to the original map. To do this would require some definition of goodness and a lot of patience, not to mention a lot of computer time. We would probably generate at least the list of many points in space from which 16 to 48 stars form a pattern closely resembling the hill map. Zeta Reticuli may or may not be significant when these results are sorted out. Clearly, this experiment hasn't been done. It has the map of figure 1.3a and b figures, both b, and they don't look the same. The map, as sketched by Betty Hill, and B, the star identified by Marjorie Fish. The map A shows the star map the contactee Betty Hill recalled under hypnosis. Model and B presented as proof that the saucers which abducted Betty and Barney came from Zeta Reticuli. Relies on flimsy statistical evidence. Drawings courtesy of Space of Age Review. Yeah. And that's supposed to, I wouldn't say that looks the same. Some similarity, but not the same. Students have moved the computer model around using television-like display to explore many possible positions, but the human mind is notoriously subjective in carrying out a job like this. Once it has found a possible solution, it will always come back to it. The number of possible patterns to be explored in the billions and would take the lifetimes of hundreds of students to explore them all by visual inspection to see if they resemble Betty's map. How many ways are there of picking 16 stars out of 46? There are 46 choices for the first one, 45 for the second one, and so on, until there are 31 choices for the 16th one. The number of space configurations we should examine then is the number we obtain by multiplying together the number 36 times 46. It is about 2 times 10 to the power 25. That is to follow the 25 zeros. That's a lot. And now every choice of 16 stars, you should look at the pattern for every possible point of view around the model and compare it to Betty's drawing clearly. This has not been done. Marjorie Fish has selected one particular angle from which one particular group is of 16 stars seems to her eyes to give a good match. This is quite insufficient for positive identification. What if a perfect match was found? What if it identifies Zeta Reticuli as a hub of the star pattern? This would still not mean much in terms of possible origin of our visitors. And an important, even crucial fact seems to have escaped the attention of those who have examined Betty Hill's drawings. Her map is not drawn to scale. The size of the stars, if the fish interpretation is correct, does not correspond to their brightness. The distance between the two stars of Zeta Reticuli, in particular, is exaggerated to the point where the map would be useless for navigation. What could a saucer pilot do with such a map? Why draw it from a point of view that doesn't correspond to any known celestial object? If the map is real, it must have been placed there for Betty Hill to see, not for the pilots to use. Exposing unsuspecting people to staged scenes in order to further a certain belief is an old trick. World War II, for example, the British changed all the road signs along the routes of a German general who had been captured and who was driven to the coast in an exchange of prisoners. He could thus testify to the German high command that he had seen tanks, trucks, and barracks in an area where the Allies were assembling a phantom army ready to strike in North Europe. We can only guess at the purpose of staging such a scene for Betty Hill. Perhaps it serves to reinforce her belief that she was dealing with space visitors. Perhaps it diverted her attention away from something else. Perhaps the purpose was to have her convince others that a space invasion was imminent. I do not believe that any of these contactees, not even Betty and Barney Hill, have been physically on board an actual saucer. It is more likely that they have taken a non-physical trip, controlled and guided by a system of which we have no clear idea as yet, a system that acts on human consciousness. The Soviets used the term psychotronic to designate such devices, rather than one that is purely physical. Symbols it uses are engineered to have certain effects. Those who experience these effects, like Betty Hill, snap out of the objective reality where ordinary perception apply. They develop alternative mental realities to cope with the amazing new perceptions. Some succeed, some fail. In the process, they become believers in strange powers beyond the realm of man. They become the tools of the very system that has destroyed their former self. In turn, they begin to change the social reality around them. Abduction reports. I have seen them on the Mike Douglas show, accompanied by reporters vouched for by Dr. Hynek and an engineer hypnotist from California. They have been inside flying saucers, and they have seen control panels, computers, dials, and knobs. They have observed the pilots of the craft. They have felt the cold metal floor beneath their feet and the lights in their eyes. Under hypnosis, they remember talking to their captors. They recall being coldly examined. They take lie detector tests and pass them. Betty Hill in Portsmouth, Charlie Hickson in Pescagula, Travis Walton in Arizona. We are asked to accept this scientific evidence, in quotes. We enter a hospital room in Anaheim, California. A young woman is speaking slowly in a hypnotic trance. She recalls an amazing experience. I am laying on one of those tables. That one that was closest to me still seems to be the one that's in charge of things. My heart is beating really fast because I am really scared, even though he has communicated to me not to be afraid. The hypnosis, a medical doctor with long clinical experience, gently urges her. That's meant to say hypnotist. Anyways, got one of those machines for taking the blood. It's like a needle on a long end of one of those tubes. So it's just took it out really quick, almost like a vacuum, and his fingers are kind of all cold and clammy. Another piece of data from the extraterrestrial file. And guess again, this young woman is a subject who has never seen a UFO. She demonstrates that the abduction experiment is a constant that hypothesis that hypnosis can trigger in almost anybody. This demonstrates that contactee experiences can be induced. Comes from a professor of English at California State University in Long Beach. Dr. Lawson and his colleagues selected imaginary abductees from among unpaid volunteers recruited by campus newspapers advertising. Those who seemed informed about UFOs and those who had sightings were eliminated. The 8 subjects finally selected were hypnotized by a clinical hypnotist and Dr. William C. McCall. 7 of the 8 subjects went into deep trance and were then asked to describe what they saw as a UFO appears to them in their ordinary environment. Then asked to describe what they saw as a UFO appear to them in an ordinary environment. Then, as they went on board, met the occupants, were examined by them, and were given a message and returned safely to the normal world. Thought about the way in which the sighting had affected them. The results of the experiments were shattering. Not only did these imaginary abductees provide what Dr. Lawson called a coherent and intriguing UFO abduction narrative, but their stories were surprisingly similar to the most UFO abduction cases, like those of Betty Hill and Clark Hickson. When the hypnosis transcripts were closely compared with those from, quote, real UFO cases, the parallels became even more striking. All the imaginary subjects described many details which are identical to one found in the literature. These patterns range from the obvious, flying saucer-shaped, in quotes, or rare and even obscure, though well-established details of high strangeness. The study does not demonstrate that UFO abductions are imaginary or that the hypnotic regression of witnesses is always worthless. but it does show that many aspects of experience may originate in the witness's mind. These remarkable experiments cast a serious doubt on the validity of the hypnotic regression to which many over-enthusiastic investigators have subjected UFO witnesses. To the lie detector test, but the lie detector test tells the whole story. The answers of the spacecraft believers. After all, what could be more scientific and reliable than a psychological stress evaluator or a polygraph operated by trained personnel certified by an accredited professional organization? Before accepting such statements as evidence, ufologists should get better information on the reliability of lie detectors. For example, by reading the report by the Committee of Government Operations entitled "The Use of Polygraphs and Similar Devices by the Federal Agency," testifying before Congress, the experts from the Department of Justice explained why U.S. attorneys were instructed not to seek the emission of evidence of polygraphic examinations and to oppose all attempts by defense counsels to seek the admission of such examinations. Among the reasons cited by the Department of Justice witnesses against the admissibility of these tests were 9 important observations. 1. There is no specific reaction that indicates deception. 2. Apparent psychological indication of deception may come from psychological factors. 3. The moral attitude of the subject towards lying may affect the outcome. 4. The subject may be able to fake responses by intensifying his reactions to control questions. 5. Aberrations or instability of the subject. 6. Taking of depressant drugs. And 7. The physical circumstances and all affect the subject's reaction. What is more important with the UFO witnesses is that 8. The complexity and nature of matter discussed may bias the recording, and 9. Excessive interrogation on the subject prior to the test and involvement in repeated UFO sightings affect the accuracy of the results. In no abduction case have the investigators taken precautions against these problems. Abduction experiences and the contact experiences, which seem at first to suggest an extraterrestrial source for the UFOs, can result, I think, from deeper, subtler, complex processes of the human mind. These processes can be triggered by suggestion, hypnosis, drugs, and the physical tools of deception. Such deception could be the work of a higher form of intelligence, or it could be the work of human beings. The link between the images of the UFO world and those of human folklore resides in the psyche. The technology of the UFOs is not designed to carry little men from one physical planet to another. It is designed much more simply to trigger the already existing imagery we are all carrying in our brains. It is the imagery of Magonia, of intelligent beams of light and dialogues with strange creatures, emerging fully armed into our local universe, like Athena being born from Zeus's head. The UFOs do nothing more than provide the physical support for our own dreams. We do the rest. Our brains erect a ladder of symbols towards the darkened skies where the strange machines hover. We meet them more than halfway across the bridge of their strangeness, perhaps because we vaguely perceive that their irresistible, pathetic adventure is our own. Then that's the end of part 1.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you are going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
If you don't know, you should take